checking in with Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, and you're tuning in to Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning in the show, make sure to hit that like, subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein. It is April 3rd. We are 3 weeks away, 21 days from the 2025 NFL Draft. And at this point of the year, this is where you hear people saying things are getting interesting, cream's rising to the top, pressure starts to rise a little bit. But today on this show, we have a very special guest when it's this time of the season. Today on this show, Dan Wolkenstein, if you would please do the honors, who is the special guest that is joining Chargers Unleashed today?
Well, Jake, you always say it. When Jake hits the phones, great
Wrong.
things happen.
Wrong.
And Jake hit the phone, and Mr. Jordan Reid from ESPN, NFL draft and college football analyst, one of the best in the business, and one of the friends of the show that's been on here yearly for, I think, 4 years in a row.
4 years now.
Very, very grateful to have Jordan Reid join us to talk all things 2025 NFL draft, those Chargers teams' biggest needs, best fits, who he sees joining the Harbaugh and Ortiz culture, all of that and more. Jordan Reid also shoots his shot at number 22 overall in the 2025 NFL draft. But Jake, before we get to that, let's talk about our friends, Pay the Bills.
Want to remind everybody that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and the number one source for everything football. BetOnline is every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. You think you know your stuff? Get in our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every single week for your chance. Weekly prizes and a share of up to $200K. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today to get in on the action. BetOnline. The game starts here.
Jordan Reid from ESPN joins us next on Chargers Unleashed. We are very excited. It is draft season. 2025 NFL draft is a mere weeks away, and we have one of the best, one of the brightest minds in all of NFL draft scouting. Mr. Jordan Reid from ESPN joins us on Chargers Unleashed to share his thoughts. Jordan, welcome back, friend of the show. How are you?
I'm good, man. Happy to be here. Always a pleasure joining you guys. It seems like a yearly thing we've been doing about 4 or 5 years now. So once again, excited to be back.
Yes, we are very excited to have you. And this Chargers team is excited to see what happens in the NFL draft. There's a lot that has transpired in free agency that has led to the NFL draft. So let's kind of dig right into it. Chargers, I think, overachieved last year. And you look at this team, a lot of holes going into the offseason. A lot of holes were filled, but this Chargers team still has 10 picks in the NFL draft. How do you see this Chargers roster shaping up in terms of biggest needs and what they've accomplished so far heading into the draft?
Yeah, I mean, they really bought into the Harbaugh mantra last year, I would say. And even though the year didn't end as good as they wanted it to with the disappointing loss against the Texans, we know we don't have to go into detail about that as far as how bad they played in that one. But I think there's a lot of positive signs as far as what we saw early on from the roster. Joe Alt, who we were sitting on here 365 days ago debating if we should or if they should take, Joe Alt or a wide receiver, and they ended up taking the right route with Joe Alt, in my opinion, even though Malik Neighbors and all those other guys were incredible. I don't think they could have went wrong with any pick, but you have your bookends set for hopefully a decade plus and Rashawn Slater and then also Joe Alt. But Lab McConkey, him turning into a bona fide, in my opinion, go-to receiver very early on in his career. I think that's something that was very promising for them, but there still is a lot of weak points on the roster. If I had to point to 4 that I would go with, I still think running back is an area where they could look to address. Defensive tackle is another area as well. And then also tight end. Tight end is another area where I think they could serve to improve as well. So if I had to point to 3 or 4, those definitely would be the 3. But with the Chargers, man, you just never know, especially with Joe Ortiz. We really don't know a trend with this only being his second draft. We don't know the route that he's going to go.
Yeah, I wanted to get into centralizing around the running back question, especially for you, given your latest mock draft that you had just over a month ago. But speaking on that as it relates to Joe Ortiz, do you believe that the way that he has approached free agency, how he has now kind of constructed this team from the bottom up, is it truly a BPA scenario for them at any possible selection that they are at? Or do you feel to say this position, they have to get it by this point, or else there's going to be a huge drop-off? How do you feel from free agency, the way it's constructed, to how it's going to correlate with the draft?
Well, you never want to go into a draft really pigeonholing yourself. I think that's always the wrong strategy to take, especially when you're in the early 20s, like what the Chargers are right now. So I think it's a situation of where they can let the board fall to them, whether that's, a running back, a tight end, adding another wide receiver. If somebody miraculously falls to them, a defensive tackle is a very strong defensive tackle group as well. So there's a lot of different areas of where they could look to go. But I always believe that pigeonholing yourself into one position is always the wrong way to go, especially when you have a higher ranked player on your board at a different position that you may not be looking to address. I always think the better route is to always take the best player available that makes sense.
I will say this last year and a half or so has taught me a ton of lessons, because I think in the past, so much of this draft process for folks covering this Chargers team was like, oh, what would we do? What would we like to see this Chargers team versus in Jim and Joe we trust? What would Jim and Joe do? And so looking at it this year, like, I've learned my lessons. I've taken my stripes. Now I know, like, okay, physicality, dependability, you want availability, you want all of the traits that Jim Harbaugh possesses in his football teams. You mentioned wide receiver. Like, I guess the question I'm going to ask you on that is, I know Chargers fans want the shiny object. How important is another receiver for this Chargers team and Jim Harbaugh compared to the other things? You mentioned tight end, defensive line, running back. Like, is that kind of like an afterthought?
That's a great question, actually, just because even if you think about Harbaugh's days at Michigan, wide receiver really wasn't a priority for them. It was all galvanized around the running game, a strong offensive line, and then just having a quarterback that, took advantage of opportunities. And then also, he never really had that high caliber of quarterback, in my opinion. And I know J.J. McCarthy was a top 10 pick, but he's somebody that I like to call just keep the Ferrari in between the lines on the highway. So, and that's not to say, and that's not a shot against Justin Herbert at all. I would love for them to get another weapon, but just thinking of what Jim Harbaugh has really prioritized, even in his college days and even going back to the 49ers, it never really was a situation of where they really valued wide receiver. And that's not to say if somebody like a Teddy-Roy McMillan or even a Matthew Golden is there at 22 overall that they won't select them. It just wouldn't be surprising if they do end up passing over one of those guys if they miraculously do fall to number 22 overall. So I'm with you. I'm thinking, physicality, somebody that's dependable. And what I love about the draft so much is that you can kind of X guys off of your draft board based on what Joe Hortiz and also what Jim Harbaugh has liked previously. If the guy isn't, just doesn't live, breathe, and dies football, then you can really X that guy off of Harbaugh's list. And that's why, like, the Joe Alt buzz back then wasn't surprising to me, just because if you ever meet Joe, and I'm not sure if you guys ever gotten the opportunity to hear him like in an interview, he's a football guy through and through. So as I'm going through my list and I'm matching these guys with the Chargers, are they football guys through and through? And are they physical? And then are they dependable as well?
You're mentioning Joe Alt, and you're mentioning where we were 365 days ago when we were talking about that pick. Let me take you back 1 year ago, because you had also mentioned, as it relates to a certain running back in Braylon Allen, you were saying that Braylon Allen and Jim Harbaugh were going to be the perfect match. And in your last mock draft that you published in March, you had the Chargers selecting Omarion Hampton at 22, in arguably the deepest running back class that we have seen in some time. Are you of the belief now that Omarion Hampton and Jim Harbaugh are the perfect match, or are there other possibilities with so many running backs in this class?
Yeah, this is a great question also. And, I think one of the biggest storylines to watch on the first night of the draft is to see where the top two running backs go, and Ashton Jeanty and then also Omarion Hampton. So just looking at it from both sides, do I take a position player and really trust my draft board in a deep running back class to get one of these guys in the third or the fourth round, or do I get one of my top choices in Omarion Hampton, assuming obviously that Jeanty is not going to be there on the board? He's off the board. I expect him to come off the board inside the top 10. But let's just say Omarion Hampton is there on the board and you have him ranked as your number one or number two overall running back. Do I go with the priority of taking that player, or do I take the defensive tackle? Let's just hypothetically say Kenneth Grant is on the board. We take Kenneth Grant, and do we take somebody later on in the draft, fourth or fifth round, just naming somebody like a Kyle Monangai from Rutgers? So do I just trust my process of taking the priority of the player that I have very highly ranked as a running back at number 22 overall, or do I just wait, trust my board, go ahead and take somebody that isn't as highly graded on my board and then, take advantage of this stacked running back class. I think that's one of the bigger storylines to watch, not only for the Chargers, but also everybody in this draft as a whole.
You're on mute, Dan.
Apologies. I think this Chargers team nationally and locally, both inside and outside the building, have talked about them needing to add pass catchers and just offensive weapons for this Chargers team and Justin Herbert specifically. And there's a lot of love for Colston Loveland and Mason Taylor and a lot of tight ends. And then you got the receivers, of course, and then the running backs. But the interior defensive line is so stacked this year. And we saw Joe Ortiz kind of use that best of both worlds to get the Joe Alt, Ladd McConkey duo together. Like, would you rather have Joe Alt and then whatever receiver you can get then, or would you rather have the Malik Neighbors and whatever tackle you can get in round 2? Jake and I have been kind of doing this exercise a little bit, and the defensive line is so good this year. And in my opinion, the tight end class is pretty darn good too, especially if you look at tier 1, tier 2-ish players. In your opinion, like, what is the avenue for that same formula where you can get 2 for the best value versus the top end 1 versus 2 later? If you're looking at like defensive line and tight end, which would you do? Defensive line first, tight end 2, or vice versa?
That's another great question, man. You put me on the spot with that one. But I think at both spots, there's really a drop-off really about the 5th round, in my honest opinion. So I don't think there's a wrong route to take, honestly, with that one, just because there's a lot of depth in both of those classes. And either route that you go, I wouldn't be surprised or I wouldn't be mad at either one. So, for example, just taking your tight end defensive line reference, if I get Colston Loveland and then come back and get Landon Jackson in the 2nd round or somebody like that, I wouldn't be mad at that. But also, if I get, let's just say, Donovan Ezaraku and then come back and get, Mason Taylor or Elijah Arroyo in the 2nd round, like, I wouldn't be mad at either one, just because very similarly graded players. And then, like I've been telling everybody, I've been saying this on SportsCenter, the guys you take at 15 is the same caliber of guy that you're going to get at pick 60 in this draft. So I don't think there's a different or wrong avenue to take in this one, just because the quality of player that you're going to get in the mid 1st round is really the same caliber of player that you're going to get at the bottom of the 2nd round too.
I want to talk about this corner class because it's a very interesting class, and more specifically with Joe Ortiz, because he always says that you can never have enough good corners. And so fully expect him to be selecting one at some point in this draft, even with the 2 free agent acquisitions that he brought in. And you had just put out a great piece on Siobhan Revelle earlier. I'm interested to get your opinion just in terms of how this cornerback class after Travis Hunter has kind of formulated, because early in the college season, where we thought it was going to be with certain players being higher, and now guys like Jedi Barron have obviously elevated themselves. Siobhan was one of those guys where early before the injury that he was going to be a high caliber, high coveted player in the draft. But as everything is shaken out over these last few months as it relates to the college football season, in general, is there going to be essentially more talent that you could find even in the later rounds with this cornerback class?
So honestly, after about the 4th round, I believe there's a bit of a drop-off in this year's class. But the interesting thing about this class after Travis Hunter, depending on how you grade him, whether it's a wide receiver or a corner, and then also Will Johnson out of Michigan, a lot of the guys are very similar, and they've all been banged up this year, whether it's Benjamin Morrison at Notre Dame, Savon Revelle was also banged up as well. Just going down my list, Maxwell Hairston was banged up for quite a few parts of the year as well. So a lot of different variables with this year's class, but also you have Azareye'h Thomas, who really came out of nowhere at Florida State. So a lot of guys that I expect to go in that, 20 to 40 range. If I had to project, we could see as many as 4 or 5 corners go in that range once Travis and then also Will come off of the board. So the Chargers are going to be in a great spot. If they don't want to take one in the 1st round, they may want to come back in the 2nd round and get one of these guys that ultimately ends up slipping somewhere on day 2. So very interesting corner class. And, I was texting with a lot of scouts last week just to try to figure out, like, man, how do you have this cornerback group really stacked? I got 10 different answers, and I asked 10 different scouts about the 2nd and 3rd tier of this year's class. So I think that's another, along with the running backs. How do these guys come off of the board? I'm really going to be watching that closely.
So let's put our Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz hat on, because I think we it's so easy for us to say what we would do or what Jordan Reid would do. But given what you've heard, feet on the ground there, watching all these scouts and watching all the players and seeing some of the execs, what do you see as kind of best fits for this Chargers team at those 3 or 4 priorities that you mentioned? You mentioned tight end, you mentioned defensive tackle, you mentioned running back, and then there's one more. But what would you say are like the Chargers dudes that could fit the Harbaugh mold?
Yeah, so I'll go with defensive line first. Just looking at my list of guys that could be there at 22, Derrick Harmon out of Oregon is one that I think is a really good match for them. It's talking about somebody we talked about earlier that's a football guy through and through. He is one. Really committed coming into this year. He came into Oregon about 340 pounds, so he lost a little bit of weight, and then that really paid off for him. He had a breakout season. I thought he was absolutely terrific this year. Really good as a run defender. But where he really shined was in his pass rush ability as well. Still needs to do a better job of playing a little bit more under control. I thought there was a lot of plays of where he left out on the field. But he's a Harbaugh guy through and through to me. Of course, Kenneth Grant, you can't go wrong with that one. If there is one person that knows a lot about him, it would be Jim Harbaugh. So I'm definitely always going to add him in that stack. Looking at tight ends, Elijah Arroyo is one that really pops to me as a Harbaugh guy. And just being that flexed out tight end, I definitely think he's an underrated blocker. He doesn't get a lot of love in that fast. And that's not to say he's not going to be somebody that he's not George Kittle. Like he's not going to mash guys in the face and get up and laugh at them. He's not that type, but I call it camouflaging. He can camouflage in there and he can take on those single blocks. He can be fine against those defensive ends and linebackers when he blocks them one-on-one. So Arroyo definitely is one for me. If you're looking for a later round tight end, that is like screams Harbaugh to me is Luke Lachey out of Iowa. I have a 4th round grade on him. He's a versatile guy. He can be a pass catcher, but really where he makes it say is as a run blocker. And we know you can never go wrong with taking those Iowa tight ends. Those guys have been pretty good in the league. And then just looking at my running back list, Omarion Hampton obviously is one that screams Harbaugh to me. I just, like I told you guys last year, just seeing those big, thickly built running backs that's just breaking tackles left and right. I can just see Harbaugh just fascinating over his film. If you're looking for, day 2 or day 3 guys, Damian Martinez out of Miami is another that definitely screams Harbaugh to me. And then, 2 more. Just looking down my list, Kyle Monunga, I talked about him a little bit earlier. And then another that screams Harbaugh to me is Tahj Brooks out of Texas Tech, another thickly built running back prospect that I think is really underrated in this year's class too.
Last one before we get you out of here, Jordan. Dan normally takes the liberties when it comes to this final question and putting you on the spot. But as we get closer to April 24th, we always get a little bit more insider information to what we have a good idea as far as what organizations are going to do and what they're targeting. So fast forward April 24th, the Chargers are on the clock with the 22nd overall pick. Who does your gut tell you who's going to be there and who are they ultimately going to take?
I'm always going to go with the trench player when I'm talking about Jim Harbaugh, man. Like, I'm not a betting man, but if I was a betting man, I would bet on it being a trench player. And I'm going to go with the defensive tackle. I'm actually going to go with Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, just because he's a big ball of clay, but I just think they would love to get their hands on him. And they surprisingly got a lot of production out of their interior guys, Tierra Tart, and then also Puna Ford. You guys can speak on that. I think that just from the outside looking in, that was a big surprise. Just studying the Chargers from afar, but I just think they need that young piece along the interior. And I think Kenneth Grant definitely does give them that. And then Harbaugh, we know he likes to draft a couple of Michigan guys a year, like he did with Junior Colson a year ago. I definitely think his Michigan guy this year is going to be in the first round with Kenneth Grant. If he's there on the board for them, I definitely think they turn in the card really quickly.
Jordan Reid calling a shot. Kenneth Grant, your newest Los Angeles Charger. Just fast forward a couple weeks and we'll see his name chosen. We'll see. Jordan, appreciate you coming on, man. I know you got all kinds of stuff going on. Give us a little sneak peek of what's to come here for you and ESPN.
Yeah, so I have a 7-round mock draft coming out April 21st.
7 rounds.
So I know you guys are already going to agree with all 10 picks that the Chargers make. So
Absolutely.
Chargers fans, if you're listening to this, please give me an A+. I'm kidding. That'll come out April 21st. I'm looking forward to doing that, and one of my favorite projects of the year. So looking forward to releasing that on April 21st.
I love it. Jordan, you are the best, man. Appreciate your work. You are one of the best in the business, and we are so fortunate to have you as a repeat friend of the show for Chargers Unleashed. You can find Jordan at Jordan_Reid on X. Appreciate you as always, Jordan, and we will talk to you soon, all right?
Thank you guys as always.
Thanks, Jordan.